Brothers and sisters, welcome to the first monthly lecture of 2018 for ISRA. I hope, inshallah, you will all enjoy this topic. It's a very interesting and exciting topic, especially these days, with what's happening in the world. And I hope, inshallah, you enjoy and take some valuable and insight into this lecture. We have brilliant lecturers today, inshallah, who kind of brief you on some of the artifacts of what Muslims have in terms of this great city. First of all, I'd like to start off with acknowledging the Daruk peoples, who are the traditional or inhabitants of this land. So before we start, inshallah. Bismillah wa salatu wa salam ala Rasulullah. One of the oldest cities in the world, Jerusalem, or Al-Quds, in Arabic meaning the holy or the holy sanctuary, is considered a holy city in the three major Abrahamic religions of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. The old city is home to many sites of seminal religious importance, among them the Temple Mount, with its western wall, the al-Aqsa Mosque, as we saw in this documentary, and the Dome of the Rock, and the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, Knesset al-Qiyamah. Today, the status of Jerusalem remains one of the core issues in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. During the 1948 Arab-Israeli War, West Jerusalem was among the areas captured and later annexed by Israel, while East Jerusalem, including the Old City, was captured and annexed by Jordan, and then later captured and annexed by Israel during the Six-Day Arab-Israeli War in 1967. Both the Israelis and Palestinians claim Jerusalem as their capital. Trump's recent episode to recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel sent shockwaves across the world. The status of Jerusalem continues to be a concern as the tension in the Middle East escalates. In tonight's event, we will mainly focus on the religious and historical significance of Jerusalem in Islam and for Muslims, and including the possible future awaiting the embattled city. Speaking on the topic of the religious significance of Jerusalem in Islam and for Muslims is Associate Professor Brother Mehmet Ozalp, while covering the historic component is Brother Ahmad Hassan. Just a bit of contents to what's going to happen tonight. So we have the two lectures, inshallah, before Maghrib prayer. We'll break up for Maghrib, inshallah, after the two main talks. We'll have a bit of, obviously, prayer and a bit of nibbles outside as well. After that, we'll come back after 15 to 20 minutes. We'll come back for a Q&A session. And after that, hopefully, we'll conclude the lecture, inshallah. So, to start off, no further delays, I would like to introduce to you Brother Ahmad Hassan. Ahmad Hassan is a lecturer at the Centre of Islamic Studies and Civilisation, SISAC, at Charles Sturt University, with his main focus on Islamic history, finance and banking, and contemporary studies. Ahmad is also currently the principal of the LMA Islamic College. He is also a certified practicing accountant and runs a management advisory practice and previously held directorship roles in several local and international organizations. Brothers and sisters, please join me in welcoming Ahmad.
Thank you for the introduction, Brother Wael. You saved me a few minutes. So I don't need to do the introduction, but I do want to mention something that you didn't mention, is the claim by few Israeli politicians that Israel has always been the capital of the Jewish people and will always be the eternal capital of the Jewish people. So over the next half an hour, inshallah, I will shed some light on the history of Jerusalem, and I will also talk about the more recent history. And perhaps from that information, you can make up your mind whether those statements are actually factual, one, or whether Allahu Alam, God only knows about the future, whether they are likely to eventuate. So let's start. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalamu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. So where is Jerusalem? A quick review is that Jerusalem is basically located in the Near East, specifically in the southern Levant region. Levant is modern-day Syria, Palestine, Jordan, and Lebanon. It is an inlet settlement which is located about 50 kilometers from the eastern coast of the Mediterranean, It's not far from other major ancient cities such as Damascus, the coastal cities of Lebanon. We do not know anything about the people who first settled that valley, which is beside Jerusalem, that eventually became the city. But there were pottery and other items, artifacts found around, and they dated to 3200 BCE, before Common Era. So this was the time when towns started to emerge around that area. However, there is no conclusive evidence that actual urban life started in Jerusalem around that time. In terms of its geography, it is sort of located on a little raised ridge called the Ophel Hill, and there's a spring on the north side of it which is called the Gihon Spring, which would have attracted hunters in addition to some early farmers and settlers. The Gihon Spring actually means the fountain of the Virgin, and also there is a valley next to it. So it is little raised. The city is mentioned in old Egyptian texts known as the Excretion text, dating back to 1900 BCE, and it's referred to by its ancient name of Orshalim. Orshalim means the city of the god of the dusk, and some historians, especially the Jewish historians, name it the city of peace, but it's more likely that the first name is the more accurate name. Now, according to Jewish sources, the city was established and run by the ancestors of Abraham, a claim that has no historical evidence to support it, apart from what we find also in the Qur'an, that Abraham actually traveled there, but it doesn't talk about him or his ancestors being the one who established the city. And there's also some text in the Bible that talks about Abraham being commanded to go to Jerusalem, and also about his ancestors taking charge of the city. So who lived or who was ruling Jerusalem in the first part of the history? Sorry, I do have a bad voice today, so apologize. Well, it was called the land of Canaan. And Canaan, excuse me, Canaan is a group of people that lived around the Levant area, so they included the Phoenicians among others. But around 1000 BCE, Prophet Dawood, King David, managed to unite the Jewish tribes and conquer Jerusalem, and he captured it. It was already a small mountain stronghold that has been known by various names also. All those names were mentioned in the Bible, by the way. The Canaan, Palestine, Phoenicia, they all come from the Bible. The origin of the Canaan people, they are Semitic people, so they spoke language which is similar to Arabic and Hebrew, as well as Aramaean. Prophet David's son, Prophet Suleiman, built the first Jewish temple about 50 years later in 950 BC. And soon after, the kingdom was divided between two different parts, northern part and southern part. The southern part became Judah, and Jerusalem was located in Judah. The city was then was besieged by the Assyrians in 721 BCE, but they did not manage to capture it, and historical sources say that they were paid quite a bit of money to leave the city alone, but the Babylonians did not accept bribery. So in 586, Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, conquered Jerusalem and also destroyed the first temple. The Jews were also exiled to Babylon. In the middle of the 530 BCE, the Persian captured it under King Cyrus II, and the Jews were allowed to return under the Persian king Darius, and they started rebuilding the second temple. In 333 BCE, Jerusalem fell to Alexander the Great, and that marks the beginning of a Hellenistic period, so Greek period. But in 140 BCE, a rebellious Jewish population managed to take back the city, but they lost it again to the Roman in 63 BCE. The Romans appointed a Jewish king by the name of King Herod, and he built the second temple. But the Jews rebelled, and in around 135, their temple was again destroyed and they were exiled. And then came the Byzantium. The Byzantium are Romans, but they're the Eastern Romans who became Christians, and they took control of the city. They took control of the city for a long time, only losing it in 614 for a short period of time to the Sassanids, who are from Persia. So you can see it changed hand quite a bit during the ancient and classical antiquity period. I'm not giving you all the details. Now comes the Muslims. So the Rashidun, the Muslims arrived in Jerusalem in 637 with the armies of Khalid ibn al-Walid, Amr ibn al-As, and Ubayd ibn al-Jarrah, following their successful conquests in Iraq and Syria. And the Umar walked into the city. He did not ride. There are various stories about what happened. Sorry, I'm lost a little bit here. Okay, I must have gone too far. Yep. So when the Arab came, the Arab Christian tribes that once supported the Byzantium defected to the Muslim side. And Karen Armstrong, who's a Christian historian, writes a lot about Islam and religious history, in her book also mentioned that Jews also helped the Muslims control the rest of Palestine. On August 20th, 636, the Muslim army defeated the Byzantine forces at Yarmouk. 3 months later, the siege of Jerusalem began in November 636. The Patriarch of Jerusalem, Sophonius, worked hard in organizing the defenses of the city, but after 6 months he agreed to surrender the city. However, he refused to surrender it to anyone other than Umar ibn al-Khattab. There are different stories I was mentioning are told about both sides of what happened next. According to the Islamic sources, the Christian archbishop went outside to greet Umar, who traveled all the way from Medina with one servant and one camel. They took turn in riding the camel, and when they arrived to Jerusalem, it was the turn of the servant to ride. So there was some confusion over who is Umar, so they all went to the servant to greet him. He was also wearing his usual patched clothes, so he didn't appear like a royalty. According to Christian sources, the archbishop was very sad about turning Jerusalem to the Muslims, but he had no other choice. Obviously, the most holy site for Christian would be hard for him to surrender it. Now, Umar was received well. He was taken around the city. He was showing the holy places. He was showing first the Church of Holy Sepulchre, Qanis al-Qiyamah in Arabic. And while standing there, the prayer time came, and the archbishop asked him to pray in the church. He refused. He said, if I pray here, the Muslims will turn it into a mosque. So he prayed outside, and true to his words, that place became a mosque, but much later on. And that's Masjid Umar. You can see a picture here of it, and above it there's the Qanis al-Qiyamah, the church. A treaty was signed by Umar and the Archbishop of Jerusalem. I will discuss the terms of the treaty in a minute, but before I do that, after signing the treaty, Umar started to have a walk. He went up to the site of the Haram. He wanted to see the Haram area, which is, according to Jews, the site of the temple. And he was shocked to find that it was turned into a garbage dump. Since the Persian time, apparently, it became a garbage dump. So it wasn't being used for its purpose. So as Umar would do, he started cleaning the rubbish himself with his own hands, and his companion followed. And eventually the whole site was cleared, and he built a very simple mosque on the site. And then he went back. So what about the treaty, you ask? So it was known for the Muslims to write treaty describing the rights of the people that will be under their control. And the treaty was signed by Umar and the Patriarch, and witnessed by the generals that came with Umar to Jerusalem. The text, if the treaty is found in Tariq al-Tabari, amongst other sources, and it reads like this. And there's a picture of the treaty on the door of Umar's mosque in Jerusalem, and that's a picture of it. Anyway, it said, in the name of God, the merciful, the compassionate, this is the assurance of safety which the servant of God, Umar, the commander of the faithful, has given to the people of Jerusalem. He has given them an assurance of safety for themselves, for their property, their churches, their crosses, the sick and healthy of the city, and all the rituals which belong to their religion. Their churches will not be inhabited by the Muslims and will not be destroyed, neither they nor the land on which they stand nor their crosses, nor their property will be damaged, and they will not be forcibly converted to Islam. And it continues describing the rights of those people who want to leave the city and the people who want to stay back. But there is a clause at the end which says if they pay the taxes according to their obligations, so they have to pay the jizya. For this time, this would have been the most progressive treaties of history. The Treaty of Umar allowed Christians and Jews their religious freedom, obviously. But there is some controversy about whether there is a clause in the treaty that said no, Jews are allowed. And I'm not going to answer it with my own word. I'm just going to read what a famous Jewish historian has wrote about that clause. In answer, he said, the traditional text of the covenant or pact of Umar with the Christian claims Umar agreed to ban the Jews from Jerusalem. This Christian wishful thinking, or a later forgery, because we know that Umar welcomed the Jews back in Jerusalem, that he and the early caliphs allowed Jewish worship on the Temple Mount, and the Jews did not leave again as long as Islam held sway. So obviously this was not true, it was a forgery. And in fact, At-Tabari includes various versions of the actual agreement, and only one of them has that clause. But that's the style of the Tabari Tarikh. He includes all the texts. So after the Rashidun, the Muslim transformed Jerusalem into a city where Jews, Christians, and Muslims can live together. It was no longer a city where anyone should be included at the exclusion of another. And this is what's happening currently. The makeup of the population did not change. It remained pretty much the same, with the Christians making up the majority, the small number of Muslims, and small number of Jews. And but the Umayyads, following the Rashidun, had a very special place in the heart for Jerusalem. The Umayyads, I'm not going to go through all the history, but the Umayyad took over as the caliphs, and they moved their capital to Damascus, which is not far from Jerusalem, and they established Jerusalem as like a capital. So they invested a lot in the city. They built, and as you can see, they built in 691 the Dome of the Rock. This was built by the Umayyad Khalif Abdul Malik ibn Marwan. This is the oldest surviving Islamic building in history, and it still looks like this. Obviously, it went through some changes, especially the top part with the gold, but the building hasn't really changed that much from the outside. They also built a mosque at al-Aqsa. This is not the mosque they built, so make sure you understand. Al-Aqsa to that side, the other one is the Dome of the Rock. This is a more up-to-date version of the mosque because that building has been destroyed by a number of earthquakes and rebuilt. So the Umayyads' time in Jerusalem is a very prosperous time. It became like a capital city for them. They were always there. They built many palaces around the city also. And some of their caliphs preferred to stay in Jerusalem instead of living in Damascus, especially the later caliphs. The Abbasi followed the Umayyad. The Abbasis were a little bit distant from it because they established their capital in Baghdad. But they still managed to spend some time and a bit of money fixing some of the places there. What's important about the Abbasi period in Jerusalem is the fact that it became a scholarly city. So a lot of Muslim scholars started coming to Jerusalem. Sufis started to appear in Jerusalem. Rabi' al-Adawiyya, famous Sufi, also came to Jerusalem and died not far from there. So it became more of a scholarly city, but it wasn't really a political city at the time. So after the Abbasi, I'm going to rush a little bit, the Fatimi came. And the Fatimis, who are Ismaili Shiite, they took over Egypt, and they also controlled Syria. And the Fatimi had a strange relationship with Jerusalem, especially one of their Khalif, who is known to be a little bit troubled. Al-Hakim, in the beginning, he loved Jerusalem, but then he decided to destroy the churches. And then the churches were rebuilt not long after. And then Crusaders came. I'm going to talk a little bit more about the Crusaders. How much time do I have? 15 minutes, good. So there was the first crusade. Now John Esposito, who is also a pretty known Christian writer on history, says two myths are in the Western perception about the Crusades. The first is that the Crusades were motivated simply by religious desire to liberate Jerusalem, and the second one that they won. And sometimes it is also proposed that the Crusades were a reaction to Muslim aggression against Christians in Jerusalem as well as Byzantium, which they bordered. But the true reason for the First Crusade was what was happening in Europe. The religious and political atmosphere in Europe, and not the condition that was spread in Jerusalem at the time, that provided the motivation for the Crusade. The Crusade became also a holy war, where if somebody takes part in it, they will be forgiven all their sins. The Crusaders left Europe and attacked the Muslim world, but on the way they attacked non-Muslims and killed few of them. After their successful siege and capture of Antioch in 1098, they moved toward Jerusalem with a smaller army of 15,000. And you might wonder, where were the Muslim armies? Where were the huge empires and all that? They were fighting each other, unfortunately. They were too busy, as they are today, dealing with each other's problems instead of focusing on the enemy. 15,000 capturing a city like Jerusalem. So although it was the norm in medieval warfare that massacres of the inhabitants happens after a conquest of the city, what happened in Jerusalem went way beyond what was the standard at the time. Many Muslims sought shelter in the al-Aqsa Mosque, the Dome of the Rock, and the Temple Mount area, but most of the residents were killed. Now, this is according to the Christian history, not according to our history. I'm going to read some of it so you can understand how horrible it was. So I'm sure they're not proud of it. And this is from Gesta Francorum, speaking only of the Temple Mount area. He says, "Our men were killing and slaying even to the Temple of Solomon, where the slaughter was so great that our men waded in blood up to their ankles." And another historian, these people were actually with the Crusaders. He says, according to Raymond Aquilas, he also writing about only the Temple Mount area. He said, "In the temple and porch of Solomon, men rode in blood up to their knees and bridle reins." So not only Muslims were killed, Jews were killed, as well as Christians were killed in the Crusade. And it appears that the Crusaders were trying they're following a policy to cleanse the city from all non-Latin Christians as well as Muslim and Christian. The first Crusade established 4 kingdoms. One of them was the Crusade of the Jerusalem. Now, I was just going to add a couple more here since I've got a bit of time. These are images written about the Crusades from non-Muslim sources. This John Esposito again describes some of the horrific images of the Crusades in his book, Islam, the Straight Path. He wrote, in 1099, Crusaders stormed Jerusalem, massacring men, women, and children. Muslim holy places were desecrated. Dome of the Rock was converted into a church, and the Al-Aqsa Mosque was renamed Temple of Solomon, and it became a palace. And here's another one from Jonathan Lyon. He wrote, the Crusaders' reputation for cruelty was etched into Muslim memory with an outbreak of cannibalism. And Radolf of Cayenne writes about the sack of Maharra, the city of Maharra in a Syrian town. He said, "Our troops boiled pagan adults in cooking pots. They impaled children on spits and devoured them." These are their sources, not ours. So you can see how horrible the Crusades were. Anyway, Yusuf ibn Ayyub, otherwise known as Salah ad-Din, of Kurdish ethnicity. This is the time where people did not really care where you come from, as long as you're a Muslim. He was originally sent by his uncle Shirukh to Egypt to assist one of the Fatimi governors to regain his position, but he eventually became the Sultan of the Ayyubi dynasty, controlling Egypt, Syria, and other parts of the Muslim world. Salah ad-Din abolished the Fatimi Caliphate and realigned it with the Abbasi Caliphate. So his strategy was about uniting first. He established a united Muslim army, and in 1187 he was ready to battle the Crusades. And an open battle in Hattin resulted in the bulk of the Crusaders' army being destroyed. He is known for being quite a conservative military leader. He always avoided battle. By the way, Salah ad-Din al-Ayyubi, he was not a person who is gun-ho like these days. He always preferred something else, but in this situation, he took him on and he succeeded. He captured, so after Salah ad-Din defeated the Crusades, he turned his attention to Jerusalem, and he was very successful in a city before that, Acre, in October the 2nd. with little opposition, he managed to capture Jerusalem in 1187. So this was a relatively easy task. But before he went in, there was some negotiation with Bailin, the commander of the city. He tried very hard to negotiate a peaceful surrender. Salah ad-Din agreed on a peaceful surrender on the condition that every citizen pays a ransom. In the end, women, children, and the elderly were let go without paying anything. Also, people who did not have any money who wanted to leave did not pay anything. One of his treasurers complained. He said, how can you do that? You had an agreement with them. You should have made them pay. And this is his response. This is to give you an idea of the leadership quality that we had at the time. He said, we must apply the letter of the accords we have signed so that no one will be able to accuse the believers of having violated their treaties. On the contrary, Christians everywhere will remember the kindness we have bestowed upon them. And he was right. His name is etched into European history as well. Anyway, after the, I'm going to rush a little bit now. I'm not going to go through each one of those. After the Ayyubis, they lost it. The successive sultans of the Ayyubi lost it to the Seljuks, the Turkish Seljuks. And then, after the Crusades, the Ayyubi won it. Then the Mamluk came. The Mamluk are also Turkish soldiers, and the Mamluks lost it to the Ottoman. During the time of the Ottoman, the city of Jerusalem actually prospered, and there was a lot of building taking place. The walls around the city that exist today were built by Suleiman the Magnificent after being taken down by a Mamluk sultan, and things were going very well until the empire started declining and the Ottomans lost control of Jerusalem, first to Jamal Pasha from Egypt. They regained it with the help of the European, but in the end the Young Turks aligned the Ottoman Empire in World War I against Britain, France and others, and they ended up losing the war, and with the loss of the war they also lost Jerusalem. So that takes me now to the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. I'm not going to read this because it might upset you, so let's go to the next one. So what are the Zionists? Before I talk about what happened next, very quickly, the Zionist movement started basically with the publication of Theodor Herzl's book of 1896 called The Jewish State. It's mainly a nationalistic idea. It is not a religious idea. In fact, most of the Zionists were not religious at all. And they believe that what holds a nation together is having common ancestry. What is that common ancestry? It's being a Jewish. And also another important aspect, which is a Zionist share with another group in the world, at the exclusion of others. So the nation must be purely made of them. Nobody else should be living there. So the Zionists, under the leadership of Herzl, approached the British about setting up Palestine as a Jewish state. The British did not take him seriously at first. Then he approached the Sultan Abdul Hamid, and he promised him to pay all of the debts of the Ottoman Empire, and the Ottoman Empire was at the brink of bankruptcy at the time, and that he would act as his public relation manager in Europe. And this is the response of Sultan Abdul Hamid. So the Turks did not sell Palestine. He said, I won't sell anything, not even an inch of this territory, because this country does not belong to me, but all the citizens of the Ottoman state. My people won these lands with their blood. We give what we have the way we got it in the first place. So he rejected it, but being insistent, Herzl got a promise from the British called the Balfour Declaration, which promised the Jews a country in the land of Palestine. After World War I, the League of Nations ratified the British mandate in Palestine with the purpose of establishing a Jewish national home. And the British started allowing immigration to the land. Palestinians opposed the migration, but the Jews complained to Britain that there was more violence committed against Jewish migrants by the Palestinians, but that's not absolutely true because there was violence on both sides. The Palestinians even traveled to Britain to complain about how can you give somebody else our country, it doesn't belong to you. And by 1939, there were nearly 500,000 Jews in about 250 settlements in Palestine, and the Palestinians started organizing a revolt, and that went from 1936 to 1938 under the leadership of Sheikh Azz ad-Din al-Qassam. And the British started reconsidering their decision. They issued a white paper in 1939, which they wanted to restrict the immigration of land. But a secret organization called Aliyah Bet smuggled more Jews after that paper was issued than before. But the British managed to stop all immigration finally, and this is the outcome. The Jews reacted with a terrorist attack against the British. On the 22nd of July 1946, the Zionist underground group called AUBURN bombed the King David Hotel, which was used by the British as their administrative center. 91 people died, among them 14 British officers. And this is being described by many as being one of the worst lethal terrorist attacks in the 20th century. So this is the partition of Palestine. As you can see, in 1947, it was announced that Britain would be withdrawing from Palestine because they couldn't solve the problem. They put their hands up and say, it's not our problem anymore. And they referred to the United Nations, and the United Nations decided to split the country between a Jewish and Arab state. And the Jews accepted because that's what they always wanted, a country of their own. The Arabs did not like the deal. There were more Arabs in Palestine than Jews, but they ended up with less land. And in 1940, a civil war broke out between the Jews and the Muslims, and about 250 Palestinians left their homes as a result of that. In 1948, one day before Britain's expiration of the withdrawal, the Jews declared their independence. A day later, the Arab League, Arab Egypt, Syria, Iraq declared war on Israel. And after a year, after a year of battle, a ceasefire was declared with the Green Line borders, and Israel, as a result of that battle, occupied more land. And they occupied Western Jerusalem, went to them, while West Bank and East Jerusalem went to Jordan. Gaza Strip went to Egypt. According to the United Nations, a substantial portion of Arab population, about 700,000 people, were forced into exile as a result of that war. And in 1949, Israel was accepted as a member of the United Nations. Massive migration of Jews started from Europe and the Middle East into what's called Israel. Now, Israel did not behave itself at all. After that, in 1956, they invaded Sinai Peninsula with the excuse that they lost shipping accessibility to the Strait of Turan. And also in 1966, they attacked Jordan. 1967, they attacked Syria, killing a number of people. So Egypt, in a show of force, they were stretching their muscle. Jamal Abdel Nasser decided to mass the Egyptian army on the Israeli borders, and that's what the Israelis were waiting for. So they launched a preemptive strike against the Egyptian Air Force, destroying all of their planes, destroying all of their airfields. This news was kept secret because Nasser wanted to get the Arabs involved. So he asked Syria and Jordan, look, I did this for you. You should join me in this war and attack Israel. They did. The outcome wasn't pretty. After 6 days, Israel won the war, capturing more land, including East Jerusalem. In 1980, Israel declared Jerusalem as its undivided capital. The UN condemned the declaration as an international law violation. So let's come to the day. What is the US position on Jerusalem? Now, in 1986, the position really didn't change that much. In 1986, Israel allotted a 99-year lease for a plot of land in Jerusalem in an area called the Allenby Barracks. This is where the British used to be. And they issued them a lease for 99 years for $1 per year rent. Now, the land doesn't belong to them. The land is actually Palestinian owned. It is a waqf, an Islamic endowment, and was stolen in 1948. So the lease is illegal. It doesn't count. In 1995, the American Congress passed a law requiring the relocation of the embassy to Jerusalem. But every president since then has been signing a 6-month waiver, delaying the move until Donald Trump. He signed one, he refused to sign the other, and he said that he will be moving the embassy to Jerusalem. Why did he do that? I don't have time to explain it. I will just say one thing. That's probably most likely because he wants to appease the people who voted him into the office, and that include a huge portion of evangelical Christians in America. Evangelical Christians are Messianic people who believe that when you raise the temple, the Messiah will come. So how do you speed the process? By raising the temple. So you bring the Messiah. The Jews don't like that, by the way, but they're happy to use that because it helps their purposes also. So eventually the two will have a problem. Well, lease or no lease, embassy or no embassy, we have seen a steady erosion of Palestine and the land that was promised for a Palestinian state. From 1947, you can see it, the green area, to 2000, that's all that is left that the Palestinians will have to establish a state on. And to make it even worse, this is the actual area, when you look at it closely, all those red dots are Jewish settlements. So there is no way the Palestinians will be able to establish any state in Palestine. And whoever said that is just probably should join Al-Hakim with his ideas about how to solve problems. It's an unrealistic position. Anyway, so just finishing off, was Jerusalem always the capital of the Jewish people? You can see the list here of many people controlled it. No, it was never. In fact, only the bolded parts I would call really independent Jewish state. So in 960 up to 721, and from 140 to 63. Even King Herod, when he built the second temple, he was a client of the Roman state. He was not an independent. And now in 1967. So it doesn't happen. Is it the eternal capital of Israel? Allahu Alam. So I don't know about the future, but you can learn from the history sometimes and see what happened. Will the Muslims be kicked out anytime soon? Well, roughly there's 850,000 people living in Jerusalem. 37% are Arab, 61% are Jewish, and only 6% are Christians. The Jewish population includes roughly 200,000 ultra-Orthodox, with the rest split between religious and non-religious Jews. The city Arab population is 96% Muslims, as I mentioned, and only a small number of Arabs, and the vast majority of the population live in East Jerusalem, while there are some others that live outside. And don't forget that Jerusalem has been under the rule of the Muslims for 1,200 years, not only since 1912 or 48 or 12. So there's always hope. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Brother Ahmad, for this very fruitful and exciting topic about the history. Such a rich and turbulent history indeed, this the topic of Jerusalem and the history of the city itself. Well, without further delay, I'd like to introduce you now to the second speaker. The second speaker will be talking about the religious significance and what to come for the future, inshallah. He is Dr. Mehmet, Ozalp. He's an Associate Professor of Islamic Studies and the Director of the Centre for Islamic Studies and Civilisation, which he founded at Charles Sturt University. He is also the Executive Director of ISRA. Under his leadership, ISRA pioneered teaching Islam as a faith tradition at the university level with Islamic Studies courses and the undergraduate and postgraduate level. Mehmet is an author, public intellectual and community leader, and has been involved in the community service since 1992. He has been serving as a Muslim chaplain at the University of Sydney and the Macquarie University since 2006. He was awarded Australian Muslim Role Model in the year in 2012. He's also an author of 3 books: 101 Questions You Asked About Islam, Islam in the Modern World, and Islam Between Tradition and Modernity, an Australian Perspective. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Mehmet.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah wa barakatuh. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Welcome, brothers and sisters, to this particular lecture that we have on Jerusalem. Ahmed gave a very good account of Jerusalem's history, from antiquity all the way to today. But what I would like to talk about and focus on is the religious significance of Jerusalem for Islam. You know, in a lot of the articles that we read about current issues around Jerusalem, they always mention that Jerusalem is a holy city, or it is an important city for Muslims, Jews, and Christians, but they never go into details. They never explain why that is so significant. In the case of Islam, particularly that we are interested in. And hopefully I want to shed some light on that. So why Jerusalem is significant for Muslims. So I'm not going to go into political issues, or I won't make future predictions as to what would happen to the city, but what is the religious significance of Jerusalem for Muslims. Just at the outset, I want to say that there are four reasons why Jerusalem is significant. And let me tell you what these are, and then I will further go into details. Firstly, Jerusalem is a key city in the history of prophets and monotheism. You know, Islam, we believe that it did not start with Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. It actually started with the first human being, Adam, and first prophet Adam, all the way across. So Jerusalem played a key part in that monotheistic tradition, and therefore it is an important city for Muslims as well. And secondly, Qur'an mentions the Masjid or key mosque in Jerusalem and its surroundings. It says that it's been made sacred and blessed. So it is a blessed city. There's a blessed place in that city for Muslims, as mentioned in the Qur'an. And Qur'an does not say that for many other places, by the way. And thirdly, Jerusalem was the direction of prayer for Muslims for about 13 years, or maybe more than that, as I shall explain. So it was an important city in the direction of prayer for early Muslims. So that there's a history there of our worship. And finally, Jerusalem is a destination in the night journey of the Prophet, peace be upon him, in a very critical time in the history of Islam. And now, most of you would know these, perhaps, but once again, the details are not there usually. And as I shall go into this, I'm going to also try to answer why Jerusalem. You know, why night journey to Jerusalem, not somewhere else? And also why Jerusalem was selected as the first direction for worship and then changed thereafter. So these are important theological and religious questions as well for us to answer. You know, Quran does not mention Jerusalem by name. It actually has changed a number of names across its history. There's a lot that could be said there. But there are references to Jerusalem in the Quran, and Fakhruddin Razi mentions three. The first one is the obvious one, the Masjid al-Aqsa, or the furthest mosque in its translation, and its surrounding is mentioned in Quran chapter 17, verse 1. But there's also, it's mentioned as Mubawwa Sidq, or an agreeable settlement, a nice place to settle for, once again, the children of Israel when they exited Jerusalem, exited Egypt. This was kind of a land that they were directed to. They were promised that they would settle there in a way. And also in that context, the Quran also in chapter 5 verse 21, it says Ard al-Muqaddasa, which means the place, the land that is holy, that has been sanctified by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So, and all of this, according to Fakhruddin Razi, refers to Jerusalem as the place. Now this image, the current image, this is what's called Temple Mount, where it has three main key sites there. The brother Ahmad mentioned this as well. So on the left you have the Dome of the Rock, or Al-Qubbat al-Sahra, which is the place where the Prophet, peace be upon him, led the prayer and rise into heavens. Right opposite to that, on the southern end, to the right of the picture, there's a small dome there, and that's the present-day Masjid al-Aqsa. There's actually a mosque there that has been built, by the way, since the time of Umayyads, and have been repaired over the centuries and came all the way to today. And then on the western wall, which is where the bottom of the picture, it's the famous wall that Jews go to pray and to wail over. You see the crowd there. So these three places is very important in that Temple Mount. Or when the Qur'an says Masjid al-Aqsa and surroundings, this is what comes to mind immediately as the main thing. And one particular note is that there is nothing in this location that is sacred for Christians in this Temple Mount. The Church of Holy Sepulchre is somewhere else. It's nearby there, but it's not in that complex. So just want to make sure we clarify that. Now, according to a hadith narrated by Abu Dharr and in Bukhari, Masjid al-Aqsa was the second place of worship built after Kaaba. Now, it wasn't the only second temple built by human beings. It was the second place of worship that was built and dedicated for the worship of one God. So that is the key. Like Kaaba was built in a time when in Sumerians or Iraq, in this, the big cities were being built. In the center was this temple, and that temple was dedicated to many gods. So Kaaba was built as a reaction to that, to symbolize monotheism of Islam and call people to visit that building. And afterwards, or sometime after that, Masjid al-Aqsa is the second major building, or a mosque, let's say, dedicated to worship of one God. And that image is the present-day Masjid al-Aqsa. Now, obviously, the present-day Masjid al-Aqsa, that building was not always there. What was built was different, and it was first built by Sulaiman alayhi salam as a great place of worship dedicated to one God. Now, this is important because Masjid al-Aqsa existed before Islam. And according to Tabari, in Qur'an chapter 34 verse 13, which says, "They made for him what he willed of elevated chambers, statues, bowls-like reservoirs, and stationary kettles." This verse refers to building of Masjid al-Aqsa. Now, you might be surprised to see statues there, built in a place of worship dedicated to one God. These statues were not in the actual the masjid, the mosque, or the. I'm struggling to because some people say temple. I don't want to. Let's use the word masjid, right? But the descriptions here is very much like it matches the historical descriptions of Masjid al-Aqsa from the time of Solomon alayhi salam. So it is pretty important to mention that. Also, Quran in number of places, the prayer chamber or mihrab is mentioned for Zechariah or Maryam when they go and seclude themselves and pray, and that was also in the Masjid al-Aqsa, in that temple. So they went there. So Quran recognizes and mentions this temple or building in number of places. Now, it is important that obviously Sulaiman alayhi salam, he's a king, he is a prophet. Naturally, he will build a building dedicated to one God. Why wouldn't he? I mean, we expect that from somebody who's got the means and the money to build something like that. So what makes Muslims claim, so if Masjid al-Aqsa existed before Muslims, what makes Muslims claim Masjid al-Aqsa? This is an important question. And the first one is that it was originally built for one God by a prophet of God, so Muslims are heirs to the prophets. So we Muslims see ourselves as heirs to the prophets, and these prophets preached monotheism, and that building was, just like Kaaba, was built and dedicated to the worship of one God. So therefore we have as much claim on that place as any other monotheist would. make a claim. And secondly, as Ustaz Ahmad mentioned that the temple was destroyed 70 AD. By the way, around the Roman times, there were some statues brought into the temple or Masjid, and the Jews rebelled against the Romans because of that. So they didn't want statues. So that was really important, and then they were taken out. But in 70 AD, it was destroyed, demolished, and then Hadrian, the famous Emperor Hadrian, built a Roman temple over it. And this was, now that is basically the end of Masjid al-Aqsa as we know it, as the original, the building that was built by Sulaiman alayhi salam. So they raised it to the ground and they built something on it which was dedicated to Jupiter, which is a pagan god. And when later Romans became Christians in 4th century, obviously they became Christian, now monotheist again, so they didn't want a temple dedicated to Jupiter, so that was erased, that temple was also erased to the ground in 4th century. So for another 300 years or so, that place laid in ruins. And actually there were times where Jews were, many extended time where Jews were expelled from the city. They were not actually allowed to come back into the city. So basically, this is the very important aspect of why Muslims claim ownership on Masjid al-Aqsa, is that Muslims are the ones that resurrected the place or revived it and brought it back to as a place of worship dedicated to one God, which was the original intention of Sulaiman alayhi salam. And as Ustaz Ahmad explained, that was happening in 647 or 648. And by the way, when there wasn't a mosque initially, there was in 670 a Christian pilgrim to Jerusalem talks about an area that was flattened, it had ruins, and then the logs were laid out, and about 3,000 people could pray over that. So that indicates that that area was reserved, and later Umayyad caliphs built the existing mosque that we have today. Now, in terms of the direction of prayer, Al-Bara, the Sahaba, narrates that we prayed along with the Prophet facing Al-Quds, Jerusalem, for 16 or 17 months. Then Allah ordered him to turn his face towards Kaaba in Mecca. This is reported in Bukhari. Also Al-Bara also narrated, Abdullah ibn Abbas narrates the same hadith. Al-Bara also narrated, before we changed our direction towards Kaaba in prayer, some Muslims had died and had been killed, and we did not know what to say about them. Allah then revealed, and Allah would never make your faith to be lost. Now, I'm going to come to this hadith. So these are some of the hadith that talk about the change in the direction of the Kaaba or prayer for Muslims. Now, according to Qurtubi and Ibn Sa'd, the Prophet used to pray towards Jerusalem with Kaaba in front 2 to 3 years before migration. Or Fakhruddin Razi says that Muslims always prayed in Jerusalem, always prayed in Mecca facing towards Jerusalem. Now it doesn't make sense that you would start that 2-3 years. It was there all the time. I think there's more or less consensus that Muslims faced towards Jerusalem while they were in Mecca when praying. The Prophet ﷺ did that particular action where you could, obviously if you put a Kaaba in front, you could still face towards Jerusalem. Now, and according to Al-Tabari, the change of direction of prayer occurred 18 months after the migration to Medina and in the month of Shaban. There are some narrations that say that it happened in the month of Rajab, so it makes it 17 months. So there isn't 16, 17, 18 months is the time that is given. There's no consensus on that. But the consensus is that obviously the direction and change happened. Now the image that I have there is what's called Masjid Qiblatain near Medina. In that particular masjid, when the news of revelation that signify the change came, the Jama'ah, the congregation, changed direction, and they even have that mark on the door of the entry of the masjid to indicate that the change occurred in that masjid. Now, this matter was controversial for the Jews. It became, I shall touch on that, but Qur'an gives it a very long answer to some of the claims that are made by the Jews in Medina in terms of direction of prayer. And these are from Qur'an 106 to 150 generally, and more specifically from verse 142. This is Surah Baqarah, by the way, onwards. Now, one of the key claims is that, and I see this everywhere, whatever Western and even Muslim sources that I read, they always say that they always make the mention very passingly. They say, the Prophet ﷺ wished for Jews to convert to Islam in that initial migration, and when they didn't, he was upset. He wanted the Qibla to be changed. I disagree with that. And let me explain to you why. And when you especially read those verses, you understand why. Was the Prophet, peace be upon him, really hoping to convert Jews with the direction of Qibla or prayer being Jerusalem? I don't think so, because it does not make sense why having the direction of prayer would be a reason to convert to Islam. Let's say if Jews or Christians came today and they said, we're going to turn our face towards Kaaba from now on, would you guys convert to Christianity or Judaism? You wouldn't, would you? Like that is a little bit, it takes light of the situation, I think, that explanation. So that's really not a reason to convert to Islam in the first place. Because conversion is about conviction in the heart, and that does not necessarily come from symbolic things. Also, there were no Jews in Mecca when Muslims prayed towards Jerusalem in the first place. So if this claim that the Prophet ﷺ was trying to please Jews was correct, it would have happened in Mecca, not in Medina. And there were no Jews in Mecca, so that doesn't make sense once again. And also in another narration by Ibn Mas'ud, he says that the Prophet ﷺ was praying for the change or hoping for the change of Qibla for 18 months. So it means that he wanted the change to occur for a long time, 18 months, right from the start, as soon as he came to Medina. So this is a very important particular narration. So it wasn't like, let me see how they're going to react, and then when the reaction was not good, he wanted to change. And also change would open the grounds for Jewish criticism of Islam and the Prophet, and it did. You know, when the first Muslims came to Medina and they were facing towards Jerusalem, Jews made the claim that, you guys are acknowledging that Judaism is correct. And actually, they have a better reason. They said, we don't need to convert. And so it was a reason not to convert in the first place, opposite of what people are saying. And actually, when the change happened from Jerusalem to Kaaba, the bigger criticism of Jews started. They were talking about, they said, and this is why Qur'an gives a very long narrative, because it did shook the faith of some of the Sahaba. And they said, basically, God is changing his mind. So God is abrogating something. The verse of abrogation in the Qur'an is Baqarah 106. So that whole passage starts with the verse of abrogation. So that was a major issue. And they also said, if you are praying, if Kaaba is the proper place of direction for prayer, then all your previous praying towards Jerusalem is null and void. If Jerusalem was correct, then now it's null and void. That's why Al-Bara, when he was narrating, they were confused. Is our prayer accepted or not? Some of them were, some doubt entered into their hearts. And actually Quran answers all of these. So why the change in the direction of Qibla? And I really think that the process taught Muslims that they are heirs of Abraham, devoted to one God. And when you read those passages in the Quran, they're all about Ibrahim alayhi salam calling himself Muslim. Jews and Christians claim for truth, and also just because they call themselves Jews and Christians, like Quran is critical of some of the arguments of the Jews and Christians at the time, based on identity only. Like you cannot attain salvation based on identity only. You have to have the right belief, right action, right conduct. So these are the kind of verses that Quran is talking about. So I really think that in Mecca, Jerusalem made sense because the main thing was to detach Muslims from all loyalties and see monotheism of Islam and Kaaba differently. And it was a difficult test, as the Quran says in Baqarah verse 143. And actually, one of the Sahaba, especially from Medina, when they were coming, he said, which direction do we pray? So Jerusalem. He said, no, I'm going to pray towards Kaaba. He says, no. The Prophet told us Jerusalem. He says, no, I'm going to pray towards Kaaba. He actually does that, and then they come to the Prophet ﷺ, was he right or wrong? And he says he was wrong. So they were tested because Kaaba was everything about being Arab, have the tribes, the idol worshipping, and all of that came with it. So that had to change. There had to be a deliberate action facing towards Jerusalem to indicate that we are moving away from that polytheism, and we are from the monotheistic line, the Abrahamic line, and that was the main point. Whereas in Medina, there was no longer such a risk. That point was well established by then, and even now there was a need to differentiate Islam and to say that we need to move on from that Abrahamic tradition with this new revelation. And Kaaba, or turning towards Mecca, symbolized that, and also symbolized Muslims' claim to ownership of Kaaba, not as a monotheistic religion, not that Kaaba should belong to polytheism. And also the Quran argues that to show the transcendence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that Allah is not in any of these directions. And in Baqarah 142, 115, that it says Allah is neither in the west nor in the east. Whichever way you face, that is where God is. Meaning that these directions don't indicate the direction of God. It indicates the direction of your worship. And also another point is that especially the 18-month delay is, I reckon, is a proof for the prophethood of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, because if it was up to him, if he so wished that the direction should change, why didn't he do that immediately? Why wait 18 months? It's a long time, especially when there's a bit of a campaign or bickering going on in that. So I really think this is the reason why that actually there was a deliberate strategy there to change the mindset of Muslims at the time, that they belong to monotheism rather than polytheism. Okay, now finally on the Jerusalem being a place where the Prophet, peace be upon him, went his night journey. And the verse in the Quran is chapter 17, verse 1, and that chapter is called ISRA, and our name of this organization comes from that as well. Even our logo, if you look at it, it's a travel from Mecca to Jerusalem, and from there into the heavens, and then coming all the way back again. So that's the meaning of the logo. I just wanted to throw that in there as well. So chapter 17 verse 1 says, "Glory to the one who took his servant on a night journey from the sacred place of prayer to the furthest place of prayer, upon which we have sent down a blessing that we might show him some of our signs. The Prophet, peace be upon him, the next day was smiling because the Qur'an called him my servant. That God called him my servant. He was really happy with that title. So Masjid al-Haram to Masjid al-Aqsa. So Masjid al-Haram points to Kaaba, and Masjid al-Aqsa points to that I have explained that before, in Jerusalem, the main masjid or temple in Jerusalem. So why go to Jerusalem? Obviously, we need to do another lecture on Miraj, or Isra and Miraj, the night journey. So Isra means the night journey, going from Mecca to Jerusalem. Miraj is actually it's ascension, but in a hadith reported by Abu Sa'id al-Khudri, the Prophet says that a Miraj was brought before me. So this was perhaps an elevator or so of some sort. He also said that it was beautiful, and all souls ascend to Allah, to God, after death through this Miraj. That made the scholars interpret the Miraj differently, but I won't go into that. So, but why Jerusalem? Why go to Jerusalem in the first place? Now, the first reason is that Jerusalem, or the night journey, is a miracle. If the Prophet went straight from Kaaba into the heavens, there's really nothing to prove that that miracle took place. But when the next day, when people started questioning that, he said, he said the Bayt al-Maqdis was open before me like a screen, and then I would describe that to people. And he's never traveled there before on his own. And that was a proof that actually that trip took place. So that was very important. And secondly, the Prophet, peace be upon him, is the seal of prophets, the final universal prophet sent to all humanity. And Islam has a claim of universality in its message. And in this claim of universality, la ikraha fid din, there's no compulsion in religion, and all religions exist. But there is that claim. So that claim was demonstrated by the Prophet going there, from the first masjid that was built in human history dedicated to one God, to the second place that was built and dedicated to the worship of one God. And then he led a prayer to the spirits of all prophets that came before him, kind of signaling that universality and being that seal of prophets. That's a very important incident, that one. And then the ascension took place. And to mark that location, the present day Dome of the Rock is built on the same site. So this is a very important reason why Jerusalem was taking place. Now I want to, because of that reason, that place is holy, and according to Anas bin Malik, he relates from the Prophet, peace be upon him, that the prayer of a person in his house is a single prayer. His prayer in the masjid of his people has a reward of 27 times. His prayer in masjid in which the Friday prayer is observed has a reward of 500 times. And his prayer in Masjid al-Aqsa has a reward of 5,000 times. And his prayer in my masjid has a reward of 50,000 prayers. And the prayer in the sacred Masjid al-Kaaba has 100,000 prayers. So this is a nice thing to remember. If you pray on your own in your house, you get one reward, and then it gets multiplied in that particular order. So Masjid al-Aqsa has that special place once again. If you pray there, you get 5,000 more rewards. And also, Abu Hurairah relates another hadith that the Prophet ﷺ says, you should not undertake a special journey to visit any place other than the following 3 masjids, with the exceptions of getting greater reward, with the expectations of getting greater reward: the sacred Masjid of Mecca, the Masjid of Mine in Medina, and Masjid al-Aqsa. But in another narration, the words are, for 3 masjid a special journey may be undertaken. And he mentions the 3. That's really important because in the first narration, you cannot visit anywhere else. But in the second narration, it's a bit more open. So that's preferred in that sense. So Masjid al-Aqsa is a sacred place because the Qur'an mentions it. The Prophet ﷺ traveled there. His ascension took place there. Very important incident of leading a prayer before the spirits of all messengers took place in that location. And it is an area that many previous revelations and prophets came and they preached and they spread their religion across the world. And even in the Jewish times, you know, the sons of Beni Israel times, that temple was really the only place of worship in the world dedicated to one God, monotheism. Really, the Jewish project, or, you know, getting Jews out of Egypt, settling them in an area, was a project of monotheism, where oneness of God and oneness of humanity, like equality of human beings, could be practiced. So that's why Jews were selected. That's why many prophets were sent to make that work. And that Masjid al-Aqsa that was built there, that symbolized that monotheism, and it was a place to visit, a place to, it was a magnificent place of worship. So it rivaled everything else in its time. And monotheism spread across the world. But of course, it would later, through Christianity and Islam, and particularly in Islam, monotheism would spread across half of the world at least. So I just want to leave you with these verses from the Qur'an, chapter 53, 1 to 10. And this refers to the night journey of the Prophet ﷺ. By the star when it sets, your companion has not gone astray, nor is he deluded. He does not speak out of desire. It is nothing less than an inspiration inspired, taught to him by one of great power, and strength that stretched out over, while on the highest horizon, then drew near and descended at a distance of 2 bows' lengths or nearer. He revealed in his servant what he revealed. These are very nice poetic verses, and they are highly symbolic, and a lot of scholars and mystics have interpreted these verses and what they mean. But we generally understand them as that the Prophet, peace be upon him, went as close as possible a created being can get to the presence and the court of God Almighty. So I'll leave you at that. And I really hope that, inshallah, Jerusalem becomes a place of peace in the world. It doesn't look like it. The situation is leading to such that it can lead to great conflict. But one possible alternative is that it could be declared a religious heritage of the world, and that nobody should really claim sole ownership. It's not about owning a piece of land, is it? It's about having access to that land, not having injustice towards Muslims, or there shouldn't be injustice towards Jews or Christians. I don't think we can remove the fact that Jerusalem is a holy city for Jews and Christians as well as Muslims. It cannot be reversed by anybody. So one particular, I could be idealistic, but if we declare that place as a world heritage of a religious heritage and kind of protect it, just like we protect certain forests for reserves that nobody can log or do anything like that. So I don't know if Israel would accept that, but we could actually argue that and maybe try. Thank you very much.
Thank you, brother.